This little session is really to look at some of the consequences for life sciences, particularly obviously pharmaceuticals, although we'll touch upon medical devices of Brexit. I mean, some of them are evident, some of them are yet to be seen. It's a huge subject, and in probably an effective 50 minutes or so, we're not really going to do much other than scratch the surface. But what I think we want to try and do is to gauge interest in subjects we want to do a more detailed look at. So, for instance, the Northern Ireland Protocol. I mean, I think it's one of the areas where there's huge amounts of uncertainty, whether it be around FMD or whatever. And I think we're going to what we'd like to do after this session is to gauge where there is an interest in finding out more, to delve a little deeper, and then we can organise future sessions around that feedback. So I'm Paul Ranson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the legal advisor, I suppose. Honorary is a sort of title of EMIG, and I, amongst my roles, I'm a consultant to VWV. I'm joined by Laura Barrell, who is a senior associate at VWV, and I'm going to be looking at the three first areas on the slightly revised agenda in terms of its order. I'm going to be looking at the trade and cooperation agreement, what's in it, and more to the point, what isn't. Then I'm going to be looking at the new regimes, really only in terms of an overview, an outline. Then finally, the probably more certainly more questions than answers, just raising the issues that the Northern Ireland protocol / problem leads into. Then Laura is going to look at two specific issues, which will probably the first two major bits of legislation we've either avoided or missed out on. The first is the medical device regulation, which I know is obviously not a prime area for a lot of you, but it's just come in. It's especially around the IVDs, which come in next year. There is an obvious overlap with pharma, and for those of you companies that are involved in both sectors, then I think what the consequences of not being part of the EU as of May the 26th is of interest. And then I think probably more interest, a more direct interest, is the clinical trials regulation, which currently I think is supposed to be coming in January 2022. It keeps slipping, as you know. I mean, there are not many laws that emanate from 2014 that's still not in force. So that's the agenda. So I'm going to go on first looking at those first three items, then I'm going to hand over to Laura, and then finally we'll look at questions. I think given the number of attendees, it's probably best to wait to the end, but as I say, I'm not easily interrupted, so feel free if you're distracted rather, so feel free if you want to interrupt. So without more ado, I'll if I can have the first slide, please. So what I'm looking at, this is the agenda, the trade cooperation agreement. As I say, everything seems to be very last minute, doesn't it? 24th of December. Then over with new regimes, the Northern Ireland problems. Then I'm going to be handing over to Laura on the device regulation and the clinical trials regulation, as against the clinical trials directive. Obviously, the UK will be bound by one, the EU will be bound by the other. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the trade and cooperation agreement, what's in it and what's out? It was very skinny. As any last minute deal is going to be, there's an awful lot that is not covered. So what are we missing out on? The centralized procedure. So we have no longer access to that. We talked about the clinical trial regulation, and I won't steal Laura's thunder, but there's going to be, as you all know, there's going to be a portal and a streamlined multi member state provisions for approvals of clinical trials. And of course, we miss out on accessing the EU pharmacovigilance aspects, the pharmacovigilance database. So there's an awful lot we miss out on or avoid, depending on your perspective. And that is something which is not covered, largely uncovered in the agreement. We'll call it the TCA. However, there is a working group on medicinal products which is to be established to facilitate mutual consultation. Who knows what that's going to be talking about? Hopefully, looking at a cooperation in those above areas and more. It doesn't say much about how the two powers are going to communicate and how they're going to work. It just very broadly says they're going to work along to implement agreed international guidelines and to review implementation of the annex. The annex is again fairly brief, but it just does provide for a talking shop really for the future. It doesn't specifically say much in terms of substance. So if there is a dispute that comes out of the annex, there's no that falls short of something that's going to be addressed within the TCA's dispute mechanism. And what it is hoped, piously possibly, is that the working group will either not have any disputes or it'll work them through. There's a standing provision is that the TCA provides that any change to either the UK or the EU's regulatory regime would be on 60 days notice, and the parties would discuss what the changes would be and debate. Again, no disputes mechanism. It's all going to be a matter for the working group. Next, please. What it does do, it has. It's all around GMP, so it's the supply mechanisms of what are covered to a degree. So it provides for mutual recognition of GMP inspections and certificates, and it is again talking in the future about promotion and adoption of implementation of internationally agreed scientific or technical guidelines. So what it's really saying is that they're going to try and converge to the extent that, or not diverge from international norms. As far as I read that, clearly it's vague, so you can read into it what you will. But that's sort of the undertaking that both parties have given. A major omission, and there are a number of major omissions, is the mutual recognition of batch testing. The UK, because it possibly wasn't quite as ready as the EU, is doing a lot of waving. Not waving but drowning possibly, and it's one of the issues is that the batch testing for imports from the EU will not be required prior to January 2023. The EU, as usual, possibly because they took a different view on this, it will not be reciprocating. There are many situations in which, and we'll come across a number of these, where the UK is having a transitional phase, a unilateral transitional phase, whereas the EU is not reciprocating. There's a lot of lobbying going on at ABPI, EFPIA on having a mutual recognition agreement on batch testing, and they're also calling this lobby is calling upon the UK to unilaterally extend its waiver for EU imports pending this MRA. So that's something we have to watch for. We don't hear an awful lot coming out of government on these issues. Possibly bigger fish to fry, but anyway, that's where we are at the moment on the GMP and batch testing issues. So next slide, please. In terms of clinical trials, there's no specific mention. There is no indication of whether the UK will get in line with the UK clinical trials regulation, which, as I say, is due to come out in January. We assume we hear January next year. Also, and I'm not going to labour medical devices unless somebody particularly wants to deal with it in huge detail. There is nothing. You do a word search in the TCA on medical devices, or in fact, any CE mark products. And it's just, I think it's on sort of supply of goods general. It really has been, well, not overlooked, they just didn't get there clearly within the time. Again, the UK is unilaterally accepting CE marks. If registered by the MHRA, there's one thing that has come in is a registration scheme, which Laura, I'm sure, will talk about, which has, during the course of this year, depending on the class of the device, there will be various deadlines. One's already passed, that's for class 3 devices, which they had to be registered with the MHRA by April. And from July 2023, all medical devices on the UK market, on the GB market, should I say, excuse me, will have to have gone to a certification by one of our conformity assessment bodies, and they must get a UKCA mark. I mean, the timing on this is mind-boggling. There are 600,000 medical devices on the EU market, so these UKCA, these conformity assessment bodies and the notified bodies are going to have a very, very busy time. We can talk about that later again if anybody wants to deal with it, but Laura's going to look at the medical device regulation in a later slot. Next slide, please. Going outside of the regulatory data protection, there is going to be continued regulatory data protection, but it's going to be up to each party to decide what that period of time will be, how long the protection is for, whether it's going to. So the UK would be, as you know, it's 8 plus 2 plus 1 at the moment, which is 8 before this is within EU. It's 8 before an application can be made, 10 years before a product can go on the market, and 11 years if the innovator company comes up with a new indication, significant new indication. Who knows what it's going to be? Hopefully we will converge, but we don't know. Supplementary protection certificates, these are, as I'm sure you all know, the periods which are which allow for the time between patent filing and the grant of the marketing authorization up to a maximum of 5 years. At the moment, we have the UK has replicated the old regime or the current regime as far as possible, and we as I say, we will have to look to see where the UK is going to jump. EU trademarks no longer have effect in the UK, so the UK created and awarded free of charge a comparable UK trademark, but pending applications don't get the same filing date, so they have to be registered by the end of September. They have to be registered with it so that they get a comparable UK mark by the end of September, so that they can benefit from that same filing date. Next, please. A lot has been talked about what the loss to the UK of funding. Horizon 2020 is obviously one of the major ones, and the TCA says that as long as the UK continues to make financial contributions and continue to participate in EU programs, then they will be funding will be accessible. Particularly, and there's a specific provision around serious, I mean, clearly the context is obvious, serious cross-border threats to health. There is going to be continued provision, cooperation, and possibly funding in that area. EU personal data, so this is the GDPR. Fortunately, in the nick of time, the UK was given a sort of transitional bridging period to apply to data which emanates from the EEA to the UK. This would have expired on the 1st of July. I believe it was sometime last week. I can't remember which day it was, but it was again a nick of time. So obviously our data protection legislation will have to run parallel with the EU's. Transfers of personal data from the UK to EU, that's not covered with TCA either, but the UK has awarded an interim adequacy decision. So so really the GDPR issues are addressed. I don't know whether or not Laura or Paul may want to address that in more detail, but at that stage we seem to have a degree of equilibrium or a degree of stability. Next slide, please. So that's the first one in the treaty. As I said, it's very skinny. There's a lot that isn't covered. We're going to rely a lot on the working party, a lot on who knows what position the UK adopts. Are they going to look to gain advantages, or are they going to look to have a quiet life and deal with the EU on an amicable basis? The signs aren't always promising, but let's see what happens when in reality. So the Withdrawal Act, as we all know, that was what was brought in to buffer the lapse of applicability. So obviously, as of January 1, 2021, all the EU regulations ceased to apply. So there was a Withdrawal Act, which effectively, because as you know, directives have to be implemented nationally, but EU regulations apply automatically. So there was a series of sort of mechanisms whereby the EU laws, in the meantime, in the interim, will continue to apply. So we don't have any huge lacunae or vacuums where we don't have any applicable law. And as we all know, pretty much the whole of medical device law and medicinal product law is EU emanated. So there's no reason why the UK couldn't continue to follow the EU laws just by emanating them, just by aping them. But again, sometimes one sees the mood music, it may want to diverge if it suits its purpose. Again, we haven't seen very much of it. Clearly, when Laura talks about the clinical trial regulation and the medical device regulation, those are probably going to be big tests as to whether we follow or diverge. Inevitably, there's not going to be much of a dip in red tape. Inevitably, the administrative burdens will increase. For instance, clinical trial authorizations, MA applications. There's going to be a degree of doubling up, and also with personnel. So we talked about QPPVs, QPs, all sorts of extra doubling up. Batch control will raise issues, and I think one could be fairly certain the administrative burden will not be dipping. The companies will obviously need to keep abreast of the GB Northern Ireland relationship, I'll look at a little more detail in that in the next slot. The outcome of this is that the MHRA will effectively be the UK standalone medicines and medical device regulator. Anybody who's waiting for things from the MHRA is probably noticing that already. In a couple of variations and new product grants, and these are well, they're not fast, are they? I think they're beginning to. The MHRA, I think, I would tentatively say, is beginning to catch up with itself, but it's been clearly a difficult time for them, and they're going to have to staff up a lot. With the Northern Ireland Protocol, just very briefly before I go into it in more detail, different rules. Effectively the EU regulatory regime will apply in Northern Ireland. But strangely, the competent authority enforcing those rules will be the MHRA. Within generally one, I don't know if you look, they must have had a rubbish New Year's Eve like everybody else, because on December the 31st, I think about 60, certainly over 50 new documents appeared on the website, guidance documents covering pretty much everything, so that there was to ensure a degree of continuity. And I'll look at those in a little more detail. So that's the overview. That's the broad perspective of where we're at. So let's look at now at medicines. Please, next slide. So clinical trials. What do these guidelines say, or guidance notes say? Unless I say another date, most of these things have to happen already. So all sponsors or their legal representatives must be established in the UK, or an approved country list, and of course that approved country, thank God, includes EEA member states. And sponsors will have to appoint someone to maintain oversight of investigation of medicinal product supply to the GB clinical trials by the end of this year. So licensing, MA grants. So the big headline issue, of course, as we all know, is the fact that all centrally authorised products were automatically converted into UK MAs free of charge. Although there was an opt-out, I don't know how people took the opt-out. Can't see much incentive behind that, but those were granted as immediately, automatically on January 21. And for things such as data protection, SPCs, and whatever, there was, for the avoidance of doubt, there wasn't a new period of exclusivity or whatever. It was the data protection, whatever rights kick in, will run from the date in which the EU registered those registered those MAs. EU MAs for centrally authorised products in the Northern Ireland will remain valid. UK marketing authorisations are required to submit to the MHRA certain data and MA-specific information before the end of this year. And the MA won't actually consider any variations to these converted marketing authorisations before that essential data has been submitted. Also, by January 23, they will have to be the MAs will have to be converted to, if they're held by another entity in the EU, they're going to have to be converted to or transferred, should I say, to a UK-based entity. And then from January 24, all stock released onto the UK market will have to have updated packaging product information. So these are possibly more generous timelines, but obviously depending on the number of products involved. The position for applications for a centralised direct that are pending as of the 1st of January will depend on the process, but the applicant will result in a separate UK MA process. The UK has offered, or is a 150-day MHRA approval, which I'm sure you're aware of, and that's for products I think they call them high quality applications. So clearly, where there's MHRA, EM, they would have gone through the process. Advanced therapy medicinal products, that's when they were talking about cells and tissues. They will be registered in the GB by the MHRA, and the Northern Ireland will continue to follow the EU regulatory ATMP framework. Orphan designation, there's a slight change there. As any of you have been through the orphan process will know, the orphan process has to be done prior to the grant of the application for marketing authorization. Sorry, there's a typo there. There'll be no orphan designation prior to MA application. The MHRA will follow applications will review applications at the same time as the orphan designation. The criteria are essentially the same, but obviously the 1 in 50,000 whatever is amended for the UK market rather than the EU. So those are major licensing changes. Again, they're all set out in these 50 guidance notes, 50 plus guidance notes. Next slide, please. Importing and exporting. If a wholesale dealer already imports from a jurisdiction in an approved country, which is obviously the EEA, prior to January 21, they can continue to do so, providing they notify the MHRA to notify the MHRA and suggest an RPR, a nominated RPR as well. If a wholesale dealer does not already hold a WDA, then they have to apply for a WDA, and that's with and obviously have to nominate a responsible person for import as well. Pharmacovigilance. Now the MHRA has PV responsibility, has had since January. Products placed on the EU market must adhere to GB requirements. Products marketed in the Northern Ireland market must have to adhere to EU requirements. EU GB, the good pharmacovigilance practice modules will remain in force, but the MHRA is to, we understand, to publish some guidance note on any UK modifications, adaptations, or whatever. Then the UK marketing authorisations, they need a PV system for authorised products. They must they must nominate a UK national contact person by end 2021. In addition, UK marketing authorisations must maintain, supply and request an electronic or physical pharmacovigilance system master file describing the system, how it works, and that must be kept electronic or physically in the UK. So, next slide, please. Other guidance. I won't read it through, but these are some of the, as I say, there's over 50. These are some of the other issues that it covers, including parallel import license, conditional MAs, and so on. So there's a lot there. It's easy to find, not so easy to review, but it's there. Okay, next slide, please. By the way, before I move on, I mean, I didn't touch on the medical device regime. Just that there's UK transition phase till July 2023, but that's not reciprocated. But anyway, that's if anybody's interested, and I know Laura will go into more detail later. So the Northern Ireland Protocol. This has been, as we all know, a very fraught issue. The UK and the EU committed to ensuring that there would be no physical checks on the island of Ireland. That was proved incompatible with the concept of the EU single market. Then the EU proposed a Northern Ireland backstop, and we all remember the debates over that, where Northern Ireland would remain in the EU customs territory, but this was rejected. And the protocol was renegotiated in October by led by Boris Johnson, and this was made part of the withdrawal agreement. So the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I enclose a link there. Northern Ireland Protocol requires customs and regulatory alignment between the EU and Northern Ireland only, and necessitates checks and customs controls on goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain, as well as some controls on goods leaving Northern Ireland and going to Great Britain. So, as we all know, Northern Ireland remains bound by EU single market rules for product requirements and safety. And Article 16 of the protocol enables either the UK or the EU to take unilateral action if what one part is doing may adversely affect the interests of another, And as we all know, there's been a lot of flag waving and tub thumping with those threats from both sides. So it's as I did warn you about the Northern Ireland Protocol. It is more questions than answers. Next slide, please. So similarly with medicine supplies, these are all questions. For instance, so a few days ago, the chemist and druggist said that there are 13 medicines no longer available in Northern Ireland. There was another recent press report about I think it was a cancer drug that was approved in the UK, but not by the EU, which was perceived to be prejudicial to Northern Ireland, potential Northern Ireland patients. So it's beginning to bite already. The hassle in terms of what's required for Northern Ireland because of the effective barrier is beginning to bite. There's a draft EU-UK work programme, so they're looking to come up with answers, but at the moment there aren't many. So the main issue which many companies are concerned about is the FMD, the Falsified Medicines Directive. Northern Ireland must continue to comply with that, but not Great Britain. And I think we really are in a bit of a pickle as to solutions. I mean, I've heard various potential answers, such as can we parallel trade and so on, and we shall see on that one. But again, it's probably worthy of more debate. And then, as we know, the FMD says that there has to be a barcode, and there has to be some registration with local verification, national verification bodies. Decommissioning is going to be a major issue. Are they going to be have to be decommissioned when the product goes into Great Britain? How is this going to raise going to be significant cost? Again, no answer. What's the answer? Supply to the Northern Ireland instead? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think anybody else knows at the moment. Also, the oddity, I would say nonsense, of having potential for UK, GB, and Northern Ireland marketing authorisations. Again, I'm not sure if the MHRA has resolved how that's going to work, or whether it makes any sense. And so, absent some sort of resolution, which we obviously all sincerely hope will come, those are the sort of things that will have to take place prior to January 21st. We're talking about importation, batch testing, qualified person, no mutual recognition from GP to Northern Ireland, and again, there's all sorts of other areas where there's no mutual recognition, such as QPPVs. So again, a lot of questions and not so many answers at present. So final slide, please. Thank you. I hear, and I read the Times yesterday, which says that next month, and I apologise for the typo there, the EU will change EU law to allow medicines for use in Britain to be prescribed in Northern Ireland without being assessed. The concession will mean the EU rules to change to give an exemption for all treatments and generic drugs used by the NHS to preserve an essential state function in Northern Ireland. So we shall see on that. If anybody knows more than that, I mean, that was something that was in the wake of the sausage meat scandal. So it was second to that in the article, but it gives some scope for hope. So that's the trade cooperation regime agreement, rather the overview of the new regimes, and some of the questions, but not many answers on Northern Ireland. Now I'm going to hand over to Laura, who will look at two of the first pieces of regulation that will not apply in the UK, and how that's likely to pan out as between the UK, Northern Ireland, etc., GB, etc. Thanks.
Hi everyone, just bear with me while I swap my screens over. Can everyone see my slides okay? Give me a nod in the audience. Perfect, great. Give me a nod, give me a wave. Hi. Hi everyone, I'm Laura Barrell. I'm a senior associate at VWV, and I have the pleasure of talking to you all about medical devices and clinical trials. I'll try and make it as fun as possible. I'm sure you all appreciate what a task that is, but we're going to give it a go. So let's start with devices. And realistically, we're here to discuss two new pieces of legislation. Well, one's I've been on the horizon for a while. The other one is quite new. The first one being the medical devices regulation, and that's what we're going to talk about first. Now, I said that it's been on the horizon for a while. It came into force in 2017, and then due to COVID, it was delayed slightly, but it's now fully with us, and it's applicable, and everyone should be complying with it today. And that really happened very, very recently from the end of May 2021. So this is happening right now, but I'm sure everyone here already knew that. Well, why is it so important? Why is it such a big deal? Well, firstly, it really broadened the scope of what a medical device was. So the definition was quite a bit longer. It brought a lot of new things into the fold. And what that meant was devices that were previously exempt under the directive would now fall within the new regulations. So there's a lot more devices, a lot more technology that's coming in. Most notably, software was a big one. Because there were quite a few apps, for example, that might not necessarily have been covered under the directive. But with the regulation, we have a lot more applicability to a lot more devices, so lots more to do. The second big change that the regulations brought in is the introduction of the EMIG database. Now, this database is essentially designed to capture a wide range of information, and is a real game changer. And that effectively went live in March. Ready, although went live, it is probably a bit of a strong word, but it's been around effectively since then. Hopefully, I imagine quite a few people are already on this or will be. But essentially, it's this big, vast database that requires lots and lots of information from lots and lots of people. So, for example, you have to put in there about your registration of your device, the accredited notified bodies, the clinical investigation data, your unique device identification information, safety reporting. It's all in there, and it all has to be uploaded, and quite a bit of it is publicly available. And the idea behind that was transparency and allowing patients to really understand the devices that are out there and effectively being used on them. That was a really, really big one. And finally, I appreciate I'm going to fly through these, and it's a really top level view, but hopefully it covers what you need. But essentially, the last sort of big change was that there was a real focus on the supply chain. So previously, under the directive, it was really focused at manufacturers, and it was about how to get your device onto the market. The regulation is very different in terms of it looks at the life of the device. It's across the supply chain. So there's a new definition in terms of economic operators, and that involves manufacturers, distributors, importers, pretty much you name it. They have to be involved with this now in terms of what they do. That varies. Manufacturers still have the highest level of obligations and what they need to do. But then we have also distributors and all sorts of people coming in which weren't previously affected that much by the directive. So we have a whole supply chain focus. It's all connected through to EMIG, more devices, as well as more people being involved. It's not just at the start, it's the lifetime of the device. So there's this requirement to constantly be updating. So for example, with your safety reporting, it's a constant requirement. So it's not something you can just say, well, we've done it, we can move on. this is something you constantly need to be aware of. So it's quite an onerous new piece of legislation, but like I said, it's been coming for a while. Although there's been a lot of confusion over exactly what's needed by who, which hasn't really helped, especially from the UK side of things. So that's a very, very whirlwind tour of the MDR. But now I want to focus on what the UK is doing. So the UK confirmed that we would not be adopting the MDR because they didn't take part of the transition arrangements, and instead we were going to sit back on the old regime, which in the UK we put into force under the Medical Devices Regulations 2002, but they are still based on a set of EU laws. So it's still an EU-based system, it's just the old one. So there is alignment in some way, in that the regulation still, in a way, is connected to the directive, but we haven't made that jump forward to align ourselves with the MDR. So still a sort of European foundation, but realistically doesn't go that much further. So we are aligned in a way, but not really anymore. We're starting to diverge and grow apart. But are we or are we not? So let's look at the challenges that come with having almost an EU foundation, and then we'll talk about the new Medicines and Medical Devices Act in a minute. So the two main things are certification and registration. So for example, from the 1st of January 2021, a number of changes came in. So for example, the UK said, well, we're going to continue to recognise CE marking in Great Britain. Let's just put Northern Ireland aside for a second. As Paul said, that's all very complex. It's happening over there. But CE marking will be continued to recognise in Great Britain until the 30th of June 2023. Certificates that have been issued by EU recognised notified bodies will continue to be valid in Great Britain until 30th of June 2023 again. But from the EU side of things, the EU has said we will not recognise UK notified bodies, even though they don't really exist anymore, because we now have UK approved bodies. So you can see how we're doing things differently. But the terminology is almost this attempt to look forward for alignment, but we are planning to move apart in this respect, because the reason we now have UK approved bodies is because we will be bringing into force, and have done from the 1st of January, you can apply for one right now, the UK CA mark, which is our certification mark essentially for safety in the UK. And we will be using this mark as our new route to market and product marking for placing a device on the market in Great Britain. So we have this from our side, we've tried to be reciprocal. We're continuing to recognise the CE mark. You can even have joint CE and UK CE marking on your label. But from the EU side, there's absolutely no reciprocal nature at all. It's very much, we're having this transition period to try and say, look, we've got an EU foundation. We still very much appreciate that CE marking regime is good, although the CE mark regime at the minute is based on MDR. So we've got this very complex situation where it's sort of a bit of old, a bit of new. We're moving forward, but we're staying together for a bit. But we essentially, the next couple of years will be very grey, and I imagine, we hope they'll get less grey, but I think that we're just missing many, many shades of grey. I won't say 50 shades of grey, but you know where I'm going. So next one. So we've done certification, now we're going to do registration. So again, from the 1st of January 2021, the requirement was that all devices placed on the market had to be registered. Now, there was already a requirement for manufacturers of Class 1 devices, custom-made devices, although that's a bit trickier, general IVDs. Prior to the 1st of January 2021, if you're already required to be registered for that device with the MHRA, you must continue to register in the same way. There's no grace period. It's sort of almost job as usual. But for other classifications, and remember, in terms of how you're classifying goods now for your UK applications with the MHRA, there are these grace periods which I've set out here, and I'm conscious of time, so I won't go through them. But just note the different times and what device you have, and just to note that when the IVDR comes in May 2022, if it comes in then, that there's all different aspects there. But for the UK and this side of things, just be aware of those registration requirements. There's a new online registration system, so don't go through the old DOORS system, go through the new application. So again, we're looking to register online. We're almost, in my opinion, going towards a EMIG-based system in an attempt to align, but it's still not very clear if that's why this is happening. But in my opinion, I think that is why we're going this way. So let's talk about the Medicines and Medical Devices Act really quickly. Essentially, it was heralded as an amazing piece of legislation that was going to tell us everything we needed to know. We didn't need the MDR. We're going to have our own version of it. It was going to be UK led as we move away from the EU rules on medical devices and medicines, and we start to take control of our own regulatory future. And part of that control was that we wanted more flexibility. We wanted the ability to move very quickly, amend the regulatory landscape as industry dictated, as new innovations came through, and by using these things called statutory instruments to basically update the law as and when we wanted to. And to strike this key balance between patient safety and making sure that devices that go onto the market are safe for patients, but also allowing innovative new technology such as AI to come through and get onto the market and benefit patients as soon as possible. And for example, we had the introduction of the new Patient Safety Commissioner, and we had all these promises that, we haven't really talked about falsified medicines and why the directive isn't going to apply, but we're going to have our own system. But realistically, all these promises and the excitement came down to this. We have no idea actually what's happening. So it was this great idea, and there's lots of promises circulating, but realistically we still don't know what's going on. There are some changes that are in force right now, but they're not really worth talking about. What it comes down to is the concerns, what's going to happen next. So for example, we know that there are significant powers being granted to the Secretary of State to amend the regulatory framework in the UK. There was an attempt to limit those powers to 3 years, and that was rejected. So there's wide-ranging powers to change things as and when they want to effectively. There's ad hoc amendment strategy. So again, we talked about there being some sort of national system being introduced to almost have a falsified medicines aspect to it. We don't know exactly what that will look like. It's all in public consultation at the moment. There's this promise of medical device regulation and allowing this flexibility of bringing devices to the market quicker in the UK. But again, it's all subject to public consultation. We have no idea what's actually going to happen. It's very much a watch and see, because there's limited information and guidance about what's going to happen. We're sort of hoping for the best. And there's a real concern about the scrutiny, and the oversight of these powers. Will they be used properly? The industry is going to struggle we need to plan, and we need to make sure we know what we're doing, but how can we do that when we don't know what's going to happen? The consultation is quite interesting, but we still don't really know if that will lead to anything. So let's talk about clinical trials. We've got a new clinical trials regulation coming in. The clinical trials directive will be going out. And the process for this is the clinical trials regulation came into force on the 16th of June 2014. Like Paul was saying, it's been around for a very long time. But the issue with the clinical trials regulation was that even though it came into force in 2014, it effectively could not apply until there was confirmation of the full functionality of this centralized clinical trial portal, which they've called the Clinical Trials Information System, so the CTIS. Well, we had the audit approval recently, and then what the European Commission will do will effectively give a 6-month warning through a notice that they'll publish And at the moment, the date that's being given is the 31st of January 2022. But whether that will happen or not, we still don't really know. But that's the date that's in everyone's minds, and we're all hopeful that's when this will finally come into force. What will happen when it does? Well, when it comes into force, the directive will be repealed in full. National legislation in the member states connected to the directive will also be repealed. The EMA will effectively manage the CTIS, their portal. So that will be the regulatory framework for clinical trials in the EU. But even though the EU will oversee this regulatory scheme through the regulation through the portal, member states will still have to authorise and oversee clinical trials in line with the regulation in each member state. The CTIS is really, really important because it's this one single entry point for submitting all your clinical trial information, your application, securing your authorization, and updating and submitting your clinical trial data. So all the regulatory oversight, supervision, the monitoring is meant to be effectively in one place, although obviously member states will feed into that. And importantly, there's this element of information being publicly available. Although there are transparency rules which allow certain information to be hidden, so if it's personal data or if it's connected to an MA, for example. But the whole idea is it is harmonisation, improved collaboration, transparency, and heightened safety measures. But what are the key differences? So that's best slide saved till last, as always. So big difference is the CTIS system. So it's this one-stop shop, essentially, for your clinical trials application, firstly, in the EU. So you apply to all the member states through this portal. You then have a single authorization procedure, although it's broken down into two parts. So you have a joint assessment, where all the member states effectively come together and assess the application. And then part two is an individual assessment by each relevant member state. And then each concerned member state will reach their own single assessment and notify the sponsor of that decision through the portal. We also have reporting procedures simplified. So rather than submitting the same report several times, essentially, for each member state, it's meant to be done just once through the portal. The deadlines have been shortened in an attempt to make things move faster. We'll see if that actually works. And again, the increased transparency, patients will have access to this. So the idea is that patients can have that comfort and that understanding of what's going on with the trial and the data that's released. And in particular, one of the aspects to it that I really like is the low intervention clinical trials route, where there's a lighter regulatory framework for specific trials. So, for example, if the investigational medicinal product has already been authorized, is already an MA, there's this lighter regulatory regime, not quite as much that you have to do in order to get your trial authorized and approved and started much more quickly, much more effectively across multiple member states, which is really exciting because that's a really, really beneficial aspect to a lot of trials. You've got a clarification of existing concepts, one that's really important that a lot of my clients have noticed. And let's be honest, I think a lot of people have already been working to the regulation, even though obviously the directive's there. This regulation has been around for a while, so a lot of trials are already run in line with the clinical trials regulation. It's just doing everything through the portal that's going to be a big change. But for example, sponsors, we now have this understanding of how co-sponsors work and the need for a written agreement between them to dictate who's going to do what, and lots of simplification or centralization, but essentially a lot remains the same. If anything, with the roles of ethics committees, there's more in the directive than the regulation. The idea behind that is to allow member states to slot in these requirements as and when they need to, but within the strict framework of still having these ethics committees and those approvals which are mandatory. I know we're running out of time, but what I wanted to finish on very quickly, because we're talking about the clinical trial regulation here, but just to add on about alignment is that there is a UK system hopefully coming into force. Ironically, in January 2022, right when the CTIS portal will be working, which is they've called it the combined ways of working, and it's where UK trials have one application to effectively get your clinical trials authorization and your research ethics committee opinion at the same time. So I just wanted to add that on because it's quite important that whilst we're focusing on the EU at the moment, the UK, the HRA are looking at having a very similar portal style system, a one-stop shop for UK trials across multiple sites. So there is an attempt to align. Everybody wants it. Everybody thinks we need it. So I wanted to add that on as almost a little beacon of hope that the UK is trying to see what the EU are doing and implement something similar. But how that will actually work in practice, we still don't know, because the Medicines and Medical Devices Act is still very much being born in terms of individual requirements for each area, medical devices, falsified medicines, etc. Pharmacy, is a really, really important one for that act. So lots and lots to be done here. Some alignment, some divergence. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? We're really hoping, obviously, the working group puts more reciprocal procedures in place, but we don't know. So I apologise for going over slightly, but hopefully that was a whirlwind tour of the regulation, the Act, the clinical trials regulation, and the differences and what's happening next.